We see something extremely interesting and new in their foodways, in their culinary practices. These people in the highlands, in the Iron One, do not eat pork.
This idea of a peaceful settlement of Canaan has now replaced the belief that the Israelites arrived in Canaan on the back of a military conquest. But in the wake of this conclusion, archaeologists began to ponder a new and even more remarkable scenario. What if the early Israelites had never actually arrived in Canaan at all? What if they had always lived there? Further excavations of the four-room farmhouses suggested this could be a strong possibility. Distinct differences between this new culture and the Canaanites do exist, but there are also startling similarities. When archaeologists began to compare the pottery of the highland farmers to the old Canaanite population, they found something surprising.
Early Israelite society is, in many respects, it's a poorer reflection of Canaanite society, but it's not as fancy, it's not as sophisticated, but it's exactly the same.
Further parallels between Israelite and Canaanite cultures were found on the coast of Syria. Archaeologists excavating here at Ugarit uncovered an archive of clay tablets revealing details about Canaanite religion. One tablet contains the tale of a Canaanite king called Keret and his military conquests.
One of his methods of disposing of a city was to walk around it and blow trumpets at it. And you know, lo and behold, the walls come falling down.
All these parallels point towards a radical new theory, that Canaanites and Israelites were not just similar, they were identical. It's a controversial idea, but one seemingly supported by breakthroughs in genetic testing. Cultural anthropologist Yossi Nagar has been studying ancient Canaanite skeletons. By comparing their DNA with the DNA of the region's current population, he has concluded that many of today's Jews, Israeli Arabs, and Palestinians share a common racial heritage, suggesting that their ancestors, the Israelites and Canaanites, were once one and the same people.
The Israelis and the Canaanites are the same, only that they're separated. They're separated because of theology, not because of biology. They are the same.
If this controversial new theory gains acceptance, the history behind Joshua and his conquest will have to be completely revised. Joshua and his Israelite army did not march in and kill Canaanites. They were Canaanites.
They were not military invaders. They did not strike a blow at the great city-states of Canaan, annihilate the Canaanite population. I think most of us believe that the Israelites had been largely Canaanites, perhaps peasant farmers who were thrown off their land by their Canaanite overlords, people escaping the collapsing Canaanite city-states, fleeing from conscription, from taxes, finding a foothold somewhere in the highland frontier, which was sparsely occupied.
If this is what happened, the origin of early Israel is not what is portrayed in the Bible. No miraculous battles, no military conquest, no mass infiltration. Just a group of Canaanite peasants and nomads resettling the hills of what they would later call their promised land. But if the story of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho is, at heart, a product of the imagination of Hebrew scribes, how did they get so many of their geographical, military, and historical details right? One explanation is that the arrival in Canaan was the experience not of all Israelites, but a handful of Hebrew people.
In my judgment, the stories came to be told by a small group who had made their way across the desert, who entered Canaan in some way or another, who had been involved in conflicts with Canaanites. And when they came to write their story hundreds of years later, they told their story as though it were the story of all Israelites. But in fact, most Israelites had never been in Egypt.
In writing that story, its authors seem to have embellished it with other elements. Canaanite myths like Keret, dramatic memories of catastrophic death and destruction, and detailed knowledge of ancient Jericho.
My guess is they drew on a number of separate traditions which come together, they put them together. You have the recognition that Jericho is a place of seismic activity, and therefore the walls kept falling down. There may also have been a historical character, and we might as well call him Joshua, otherwise we'd have to invent somebody with the same name. You put all these ingredients together, and you have the story of Joshua capturing Jericho.
Here, at last, we begin to glimpse the reality behind the story of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. It's not one true story, but many, woven together to make a point, not about history, but freedom and faith.
If we press the story too far and try to prove that everything in it is historically true, I think we lose the point the biblical writers wanted to make. It was a point about liberation. The liberation of a people who had nothing going for them whatsoever, but became in time a mighty nation. And I think the story can be read still in that way, metaphorically. A story about a new land, a new beginning, a new way of viewing human destiny.
Perhaps this is the legacy and tragedy of Joshua's battle at Jericho. That one man's liberation is another man's oppression. That a fictional battle became a real and terrible conflict. And 2,500 years after the writers described it, the bloodshed is not yet over.